No, I think I could say ditto. Archie brought up the point of listening, and Susan has too, and that it was a very good trait. It's not one that you just have automatically. I think you have to practice, and I try to, like Susan. I try to. What he did for me, and I believe that's your question, is, and do I try to carry it on, is he provided resource, and that resource was, again, I think Archie mentioned the networking aspect of introducing me to different people, and so that you could network and communicate. The thing that I found amazing, and I try to do this too, whether or not he was, he seemed, he would call, he would come by, he would meet, he would seem genuinely interested in you, what you were doing, and I think that he was. I want to believe that he was genuinely, but I think that's very important to a person's own ego, that it gives them a feeling of usefulness, and again, I try to practice that. He was a person, and I try to practice that, and I think I've heard in lots of leadership groups. I heard it of Sam Walton. You want to manage by walking around. You don't want to sit on the back end and manage that way. You want to manage by walking around. And John did that. He moved around. He'd go from office to office or whatever. And I'm sure he did Hugh the same way. But again, he would move around to different things. And yes, I do try to practice those things. So that's what he's left for me to encourage the people that I'm in contact with.
John didn't teach me the golden rule, but he reinforced the importance of living by the golden rule. I grew up in a household that was not very religious, but my father drilled into me and my brothers, from as long as I can remember, the importance of treating other people the way you want to be treated. And I think that's probably the most important thing any of us can do, live by, and John certainly did, and working with John, being around him during the 90s, and working with the Northwest Arkansas Council, his ability to work with folks like Sam Walton and Don Tyson and J.B. Hunt and the other lesser people on the council, and treating everybody the same, I think was key, something we all need to work to live by.
You know, I think best describes my feeling in response to your question was the way I felt after John's passing. John was one of the best sounding boards. He was capable of hearing about a community problem, for example, and helping reach a good direction. And I remember how much I missed and how many times I thought to pick up the phone or go downstairs and sit down and talk about an idea or a problem or some direction for some community project or need. And it was months before I stopped that immediate thought, I'll talk with John about this, or suggesting to somebody else that they talk to John. He was always there, accessible, with ideas to help resolve those kinds of issues. And I really miss that, still miss it to this day.
I'm not sure what I can add, but certainly love that term accessibility. I just think that's a great way to describe that quality. But I remember when we went to see John, because when you have an idea, you would go to see John. And we went to John with the idea of the land at the corner of Mountain and School for the new library. And instead of making lots of comments for or against, John sat there very quietly with a Cheshire cat grin on his face from ear to ear. And so we knew that it was a good site. And did we need an expensive survey? No. We knew it was a good site. So, but that sort of quiet support was invaluable, and I think it's, for me, I think it's will always be a growing edge. Is how you can help others through quiet support, through being, and of course I want to go back to being welcoming again, because as a newcomer who wants to contribute, there can be nothing more important than being welcome.
Then you segue and give Hayden and Jay a chance if they want to say anything at this point, then we come back to the reading maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that
This is also kind of Hayden's day. Hayden has to get this film done. He'll be a contributor. Busy.
so. Absolutely. We'd love to open it up now again for sound purposes. If you could go up to the podium, that would be ideal. We also have people who couldn't be here that wrote some things to be read. So I think that we have.
Hayden, what I said was if we I would give the floor to Hayden. If you want to say anything, you don't have to. Just we want to be respectful of all people in the audience, and David and Jay, or you may want to yield to everybody else. Now, I'm sorry, this will get a little louder as the day goes on. The outside noise is perfect when it's 7:30, but
I think John understood how to leave his ego at home. And the ego is our biggest enemy when we're trying to communicate, because we're defended. And John wasn't defended. And he could lift the other person because he could see through their ego. And that's something that a lot of us can't do. I couldn't do that. And he understood it, and somehow was able to make the choice to leave it at home. I don't know how he did that, but that made everybody feel warm, because you were seeing his heart, you weren't seeing his ego. I think that's a real blessing, and I wish he would have taught me how to do that.
I think you learned it well. Hayden?
Well, I heard it said that John loved the and I would agree with that. I don't know of any political contribution he ever made. But of course, I've been gone for 27 years. Maybe he weakened in that last. When I was there, you couldn't get a politician, couldn't get a dime out of John. He'd listen and talk to him, give him his opinion, but boy, that was it. So back in the 70s, this is kind of a funny story. Back in the 70s, when the Nixon administration was in, the virtually dropped a lot of regulations on bank terms. And they were issuing bank terms, you could buy bank terms. And so we were a little upset. I said, John, we've got to get we've got to work for legislation to bring back some sanity into this bank term. He agreed with that. And I said, I asked for a political contribution for one of our representatives. Well, he said, I don't know about that. And it really got down to I had to remind him how many times I contributed to one of his ideas. And I finally wrestled somebody out of it. I had this envelope in those days, deal with cash. I had this envelope of cash. And I went down and met with politicians, people Feydville, banks up there, and talked to them, asked for your support. I handed the envelope and put some in your pocket. And there's several of those. One of his aides came down there and said he had that one envelope, and he said, senator doesn't understand what this means. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, there's one envelope there, the cash was in there, which was a picture of George Shelton in the Hollywood Halloween outfit. I don't know whether John put it in there. John and I were friends, we lived together. Our lives kind of mirrored each other. And he did so many things that people aren't aware of. And I'm going back pre-1985. So, but we did a lot of things. He did. One thing I don't talk about tonight that he did was Feydville, back in the urban renewal days, Feydville had already received a $500,000 grant. Now today that's chicken feed, nobody worried about it. But then that was money, that was worth $500,000. And we were in the throes of losing it because we missed the deadline. And under the regs, we were supposed to be returning the money. And I found out about it, John found out about it, and we went over there, found out that whoever it was that was in charge of our project had left, and nobody picked the ball up, nothing had been done. And long story short, we got busy, we hired her, we knew we offered, we applied for an extension, we got the extension. And it all went into making beginnings of what the square looks like. Anyway, he did so many things that people aren't aware of. For the benefit of the town. He never profit-driven for anything. It was always for somebody else or for this. Are there any questions? Any history questions?
The original pronunciation of Fayetteville was Feydville, and Hayden still says that. That's how I said Fayetteville growing up. It was not Fayetteville, it was Feydville.
I'm guilty.
And you're guilty.
Hayden, tell us about the square. If everybody can kind of go back to 1968 or 70, and Walmarts and malls were coming, and everybody's square downtown area was dying, and you'll see many new buildings downtown. And what you took McIlroy Bank's tower, built that tower, and then John built this. You went first, I guess, but he was right behind you, and you both did it to save the square.
Growing up, Feydville was a square. I mean, we had every convenience up here that town needed. Liquor stores, to shoe stores, to drug stores, to 2 movie theaters, to restaurants. I mean,
Grocery
it's all
stores.
right here.
Yeah.
And by the time you're talking about
Feed store.
90% of that was gone, and the other 10% was packing the bags. And it really looked around. We considered moving the McIlroy Bank off the square, and decided we were under the gun. Our building was about to collapse, literally collapse. So anyway, we made the move, and I had to hold my breath. And thank goodness that John was over here, and he had to lobby pretty hard to get a commitment out. There were some people that didn't want to build a bank on the square. But when he committed, then you had Al Eason, and you had hotels, and you had continuing education, and it saved it. And you'd have to wonder what you would call Feydville if the square wasn't here. I mean, would it be a strip out 71? Would it be out across from the mall someplace? Yeah, of course, in the meantime, we lost the post office. And so that was scary times, but it worked out. And I think town is much, much better off. It's a beautiful story.
Sure is. For which we're grateful to you, right, everybody?
Yeah.
Good job. Another. Jake?
Well, he had a really good empathy with people other than his son. Yeah, you have one.
You learned that from his old.
Yeah. But he could know how you feel and what you're thinking and be able to respond and bring the best out of you, in whatever situation. But sometimes when you're a teenage boy, they aren't the best situations, and he could be stern and lead you the right way, whether you wanted him to or not. Some of his famous things are, I'm disappointed in you. That was just a killer. He changed whatever you were doing. Or nothing good can come from that. You just would change your course right away. And he had a really good vision, because he would take Julie and I, drive us up Highway 265 and south. I mean, it just sucked. I mean, there's shanty-looking places and, people barely scratching by. The difference is education. The people there didn't have the opportunities because they just didn't have the education. So that was his vivid picture that you need to keep your butt in school. That was pretty young. He had a great way of connection with resources, people, and ideas. And everybody said that, but he had a way of doing it real subtle. Just, you didn't know the force was with you. But it was. And touch. He was really good about just using enough power to get it done, but not with a sledgehammer. You got it. Whatever situation he knew, just so we all miss him. And thank you for thinking of it.
That's great, Jake. Thank you. Very well done. Amy, back to you.
Yes, Dwayne.
Elaine Williams in the house.
Good morning, I'm Dwayne Cromwell. I worked with John for 10 years raising money for the University for Fulbright College. Now, I want to say that along with him having a vision and making it turn real, he combined that with honoring the history of this town. As the first time I worked with him, John had this idea that Senator Fulbright had been away too long, and he wanted to have a homecoming for Senator Fulbright, who hadn't been here, I think, in 8 years or so at that time, and his wife had died in the meanwhile. And so he got together with Dan Ferrier, and Dan called over to the University Relations. The next thing I knew, I was down in John's office, and it was on my shoulders to organize this homecoming for Senator Fulbright, which we did at the Bank of Feydville. You were there. How many others were there that day? And the senator was so overwhelmed that John took the effort to invite him back to town. And I will tell you, the closest I ever came to hearing John say anything bad about anybody was he admired the senator so much, and the senator was his mentor. But he also warned me, if you play golf with him, don't let him keep the scorecard. Well, that reception, that homecoming was so successful, it led to 2 years later, we had a bust by Hank Kaminsky being placed on the square right over here. And we had named the gardens for Senator Fulbright at the ceremony when we erected that bust. And there's some words on that bust that I ended up writing. And as you know, the president gets to award the Medal of Freedom. It's the highest civilian award. And normally they give about 10 of them at a time at the White House, and it's a very brief ceremony. Well, the first one President Clinton gave was to Senator Fulbright. And it was the only one given, and we filled an entire ballroom at a Washington, D.C. hotel
And when the colonel came out and read the citation awarding the medal to the senator, he used the words that are over here on our square. And a few years after that, when President Clinton gave the eulogy for Senator Fulbright in the National Cathedral, they used those words on our square. I'll just answer the question about what the senator did for me. It was later during a health crisis that he had also gone through himself 10 years before, and he was helping me. He taught me the value that being glad you woke up alive every day. That was John's main gift for me. Thank you.
My name is Elaine Williams. My husband and I and our 2 children moved to Fayetteville in 1979. And if you'll think for a minute, we all grow up someplace. And in that someplace, we have friends and brothers and sisters and cousins, and we know the pharmacist and the banker, and that's our community. But for those of us who get transplanted and are newcomers, it's a little strange because we don't know the pharmacist, and we know some neighbors that we meet that also came from Indiana, but anyway, it was a little disheartening. So we moved into Fayetteville. George Fawcett, who always said federal. In fact, we went back to our hotel one night and we took out a map and we said, I wonder where Federal is. George keeps talking about showing us more places in Federal. Anyway, so we opened a bank account at the Bank of Fayetteville. Well, it was First National. And at that time, John had instituted a little bus tour for people that opened new accounts there. And so we signed up, took the kids, we'd go on a little bus tour of Fayetteville, down past the Ridge House, over around campus, down Dixon Street, learned about what the old post office used to be, all of that. And all of a sudden, that was the beginning of making our community here. And 30 years later, I said to John one day, you know, I really miss that we don't have that bus tour anymore. We have all these new people that don't know about Fayetteville and the history. And he said, that's a really good idea. I don't know why we stopped doing that. So if there's anyone out there, real estate people, bankers, I don't know who you are, but let's start that again. Because so we miss John a lot. He's a great man.
I think he's at work right now through that challenge. Can we now go to the reading of Mike? And then I know we're kind of stretching beyond what might be the length of the program. So if anybody needs to leave, you can just step away. But we'll continue to let the cameras run and record it. And I think we would like to ask you to wait until the 3 or 4 people that are going to send something in writing. Pretty special. And Elaine's here. She wants to say something. I heard her at 3:30 this morning. That's good.
Thanks for putting this together. I've learned a lot of things today, and thank y'all too. And David and Jay, thanks for being a part of it. Archie pointed out my youthfulness or immaturity, or I hadn't felt this young since the other night I went to a concert, and the woman who asked for my ID said, "Can I see your ID, sir?" And I thought, that doesn't match up. Calling me sir. But I was flattered nonetheless. But so my story, and then I'm going to read some remarks, but my story comes from, and maybe I'm the only person in the room who was a little kid when they first met John, except for Jay. So, but a little different perspective. So my parents brought me to the bank, and I'd see John around at community events. And he could have very easily just paid attention to my parents who were involved in the community, who could have helped with projects or initiatives. But I have these vivid memories of John talking to me and making me feel like a human being and making me feel like a grown-up, or treat me like a part of the discussion. As I look back on my life growing up here in Feydville, there are only two men that really stand out in my mind that treated me like a person when I was a kid, and that was Dick Atkinson, the former dean of law school, who had the firmest handshake on the planet, and John Lewis. That just, I knew I was somebody and part of the community and respected, and I appreciated that, and it helped me grow as a person. And then I was still youthful when I came back here the night before I interviewed for this job at the Northwest Arkansas Council. I think I was 35. I'd been away from Northwest Arkansas for almost 20 years. I was just scared the night before the interview. Sorry to be so blunt. And it was at an event at Feydville Public Library. And it was a reception. He came right up to me, treated me with decency and respect. And there's a lot of things on here, but decency and respect and humanity, I think, needs to be added. And I said, John, I'm following a legend. Uvalde did this job for 15 years. He's seen the world. He's been a leader in state politics, local government. Look at all he's accomplished. And I still remember what he said to me. This may not be an exact quote, but I think it's real close. He said, you tell them, and I can't do his voice, I've heard him impressive. You tell them that just because you don't have Uvalde's white hair, you have different ideas and perspectives to offer. And if they don't like it, we'll find another job for you, so move here anyway. So, I really appreciate that. I did not have Uvalde's white hair then, but I do now, 7 years into the job. But what I get to do is read some prepared remarks that Uvalde said. State Representative Uvalde Lindsey, State Senator-elect Uvalde Lindsey is in Little Rock doing our business, doing the people's business. But John worked closely with Uvalde at council and on other community development activities. And Uvalde sent some great remarks, and I'm going to read these just as he sent them. It seemed that every time there was something that needed to be done to move Feydville forward, John was always there, leading a collective effort of Feydville's leadership to meet our challenges and opportunities. There was no Feydville cause he would not embrace and in some way champion if it would help Feydville move forward to become a stronger community. John was the go-to guy when you needed help making things happen, enhancing the university, saving the square, creating Beaver Lake and the regional water supply, building the regional airport, building the Fulbright Expressway, and later I-540. The list of great projects John championed is without end. John Lewis loved Feydville, and he loved Northwest Arkansas. We're much better because he led us to do great things. Uvalde Lindsey.
Thank you, Mike. Very well done.